Helen stood in the quiet hallway of St. Luke's Hospital, the walls cold enough to sting her skin as her hands trembled uncontrollably. She had barely caught her breath from rushing across Manhattan when the doctor approached her with an expression that refused to make sense. His voice dropped, steady but weighted. "Helen, the test shows a biological connection between you and Simon that shouldn't exist." Her heartbeat thudded so loudly she could feel it echo in her ears. A connection? With Simon? Her mind pushed against the words, but they stood firm, heavy as stone. Helen tried to speak, but all she managed was a shaky breath. The floor felt less like something she stood on and more like something shifting beneath her. Her thoughts scattered, fragments of their past, fragments of her present, fragments of everything she believed she had locked away years ago. She had come here expecting to donate blood, not to be told a truth capable of rearranging her entire life. The doctor's gaze stayed fixed on her, worried she might collapse. Her pulse hammered harder. Her breath quickened. Her chest tightened with confusion she didn't have the words for. The hallway blurred around her as the screen cut sharply. Clean, sudden, jarring. Welcome to Mr. Steve Stories, where everyday moments turn into powerful, unforgettable tales. If you're joining us for the first time, we're thrilled to have you here. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss the stories that move hearts, spark imagination, and remind us what truly matters. Let's dive into today's story. Life has a way of reaching into your quietest moments and pulling you into storms you never thought you'd face again. Most people know what it feels like to move forward after someone shattered their heart, only to discover that the past isn't as distant as they believed. Helen understood that feeling too well. She had spent years building a simple, steady life in Brooklyn, working long hours, managing bills that never seemed to shrink, learning to love her peace more than the memories she tried to forget. Her mornings were predictable, her routines comforting, her emotions tucked neatly into corners she rarely opened. Many of us know that rhythm, the desire to heal, to breathe, to stand on our own after loving someone who wasn't ready to meet us where we stood. But all it takes is one call to undo everything, one unexpected moment, one voice you didn't expect to hear, one message that shakes your certainty down to its foundation. That's where Helen found herself, caught between the life she had built and the man she once loved, who now lay fighting for breath in a hospital bed. And just like anyone watching this right now, she didn't feel prepared. She didn't feel brave. She didn't feel steady. She felt human, messy, conflicted, overwhelmed. Because no matter how strong we think we've become, some people from our past carry the power to knock the wind out of us without even being in the room. Brooklyn mornings had a rhythm Helen had learned to trust. Even when life around her felt unpredictable, the steady hum of traffic rolling down her block, the chatter of neighbors arguing gently over parking spaces, and the hiss of steam from the old radiator in her apartment offered a sense of order. It was her little corner of survival, one she built after her world with Simon cracked apart 3 years ago. Her apartment wasn't large, but it held pieces of her growth. A second-hand dining table with a leg she had reinforced using adhesive and stubborn hope. A set of mismatched plates she collected from clearance racks. A couch that sagged slightly in the middle but felt like home because she had fallen asleep on it during nights she worked too late. Everything in the space represented progress she earned alone. The morning sunlight slipped through her curtains, landing on her face as if urging her to get up. She groaned softly, stretching before forcing herself upright. Rent was due soon. Bills were lined up on the kitchen counter like they had scheduled a meeting behind her back. The day ahead promised stress, but she had learned to carry it with quiet strength. She showered quickly, dressed, and tied her hair back with the same elastic she had been using for months. When she checked her reflection, she paused for a moment, not to admire herself, but to acknowledge the woman she had become. Independent, tired, determined, still piecing herself together. Her humor saved her when life felt heavy. "Brooklyn, I love you," she muttered to her empty apartment. "But why does surviving here feel like an Olympic sport?" She grabbed her work bag, slung it over her shoulder, and hurried toward the door. She needed to catch the bus before it became standing room only, something she had no patience for today. She locked her door and descended the stairs, mentally listing the tasks waiting for her at work. But just as she stepped onto the sidewalk, her phone buzzed, an unfamiliar number lighting up the screen. She almost ignored it. Unknown numbers rarely meant anything good. They meant overdue notices, mistaken deliveries, or someone trying to sell her. something she didn't need, but something in her chest nudged her to answer. She hesitated, then raised the phone to her ear. "Hello?" A breathless voice responded, strained and urgent. "Is this Helen?" She stiffened. "Yes. Who's calling?" "This is the nursing desk at St. Luke's Hospital. We need to verify something. Are you the Helen listed as having a prior connection to Simon?" Her heart thumped once, hard. That name, that past, that wound. She swallowed. "Connection in what way?" "We don't have time to explain everything. Simon has been admitted in critical condition, and you're listed as a potential blood match. We need you to come immediately." Air left Helen's lungs in a sharp, trembling exhale. She stepped back, bracing herself against the exterior wall of a corner store. Simon, critical condition. A blood match? Her pulse raced. Memories flickered. His voice during late-night conversations, his confidence in boardrooms, the small ways he disappointed her, the ways he didn't know how to stay. She had fought so hard to rebuild after him, and now life was dragging her backward with one phone call. "Are you sure you have the right person?" Helen asked, her voice unsteady. "Yes, ma'am. Time is extremely limited. Please hurry." Her breath caught. Panic pressed against her ribs, but so did something else. Something that felt like responsibility, mixed with leftover emotion she hadn't fully resolved. She looked down the street. The bus she needed approached the stop, its doors opening as people shuffled inside. Her normal life waited there. Routine, work, stress, stability. But the call in her hand invited chaos, questions, and memories she wasn't ready to face. She closed her eyes for a moment. She already knew her answer. "I'm on my way," she whispered. She turned around, rushing back toward the subway instead of the bus. Her shoes slapped against the pavement as she moved with purpose she didn't fully understand. She didn't know what waited for her at the hospital. She didn't know what condition Simon was in. She didn't know what this meant for her heart or her peace. All she knew was that Simon needed blood, and somehow she was the match. Before descending the subway steps, she paused just long enough to mutter to herself, "Why does fate always call at the worst possible time?" She hurried down the stairs, joining the crowd. Her mind raced with possibilities, fears, and unspoken feelings she thought she had buried long ago. As she boarded the train, her phone vibrated again, this time with a reminder from her budgeting app. She almost laughed. Life had a strange sense of timing, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could distract her from the truth. She was going to the man she once loved, the man who broke her, the man she wasn't sure she forgave, the man who now depended on her for life. And as the train doors closed, she whispered the CTA gently into the world, as if confiding in whoever might be listening. "If you're still watching, tell me in the comments. Would you go help your ex?" The subway platform was crowded, but Helen barely noticed the swarm of commuters moving around her. Everyone else had their own mornings to worry about, jobs to reach, plans to follow, routines that kept them grounded. But for Helen, everything had snapped out of place the moment the nurse said Simon's name. The arriving train screeched to a stop, and she stepped inside with the others. She grabbed a pole as the train lunged forward, pulling her deeper into Manhattan. The familiar sway of the subway usually soothed her, but today it made her stomach twist. The overhead lights flickered slightly as the car rattled through the tunnel. Helen stared at the reflection in the window, her own face staring back at her, tense and uncertain. She felt the weight of memories pressing against her chest, creeping back into the spaces she had tried to seal shut. Simon had been a complicated chapter in her life. Brilliant, confident, charming when he wanted to be, but emotionally guarded in ways that exhausted her. She once believed love could melt through that armor, but some walls weren't built to fall. Not then, at least. Even now, flashes of their time together drifted into her mind, uninvited. The rooftop dates where he loosened his tie and tried, awkwardly, to talk about something other than work. The mornings he left early, but always brewed her coffee before rushing out. The arguments that spiraled into silence, because he didn't know how to stay present when emotions entered the room. The breakup that left her feeling like she had placed her entire heart in his hands, only to watch him set it down gently and step away. She had spent 3 years undoing the hold he had on her. 3 years convincing herself she deserved love that didn't come with confusion. 3 years picking up pieces she didn't realize were missing until he was gone. Now fate was dragging her straight back into his life without asking if she was ready. The train jerked slightly, pulling her out of her thoughts. She tightened her fingers around the pole, grounding herself. She didn't want to drown in memories. Not today. Not when urgency pressed on her from every direction. She forced herself to breathe deeply, inhaling the city's mix of coffee, metal, and early morning exhaustion. She reminded herself why she was doing this. Not for nostalgia, not for longing, not for closure. A life was at stake. His life. That was enough. As the train approached the next station, she felt another wave of emotion rise. Not quite fear, not quite anger. Something else. Something that lived in the uncomfortable space between love and hurt. Did she still care about him? She didn't want to answer that. Not here. Not yet. The train doors opened at Midtown, and more people pushed inside. Helen shifted slightly, making room. Her thoughts throbbed with questions she couldn't escape. Why was she listed as a match? How did the hospital even get her number? Why her, after all these years? And what exactly had happened to Simon? Her stomach tightened again. She wished she had asked the nurse more questions, but everything had happened too fast. All she could picture now was Simon lying somewhere in that hospital, pale and silent, while doctors scrambled to save him. The thought made her chest ache unexpectedly. She shook her head, trying to clear it. This wasn't the time to reopen emotional wounds. She needed to stay focused. The past didn't matter. Not right now. When the train slowed again, she stepped off at her stop, rushing up the stairs 2 at a time. The cold air slapped her face as she emerged onto the street, but she barely felt it. Manhattan buzzed with its usual intensity, cars honking, people shouting into phones, vendors setting up carts. But Helen moved through it all as if the world had narrowed to a single destination. Every step brought her closer to St. Luke's, closer to answers she hadn't asked for, closer to a truth she wasn't prepared to face. As she reached the hospital entrance, her breath caught. The building stood tall and imposing, its glass doors reflecting the morning light. She paused for a moment, her pulse hammering in her ears. Inside those walls, the man she once loved was fighting to live. Inside those walls, doctors were preparing for her arrival. Inside those walls, a mystery waited, one tied to her in ways she did not yet understand. She pushed through the doors, greeted by the sterile scent of disinfectant and the faint hum of hospital activity. Her anxiety flared instantly, but she forced herself forward. A nurse at the front desk looked up. "Helen?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Yes. Come with me. The doctor is waiting." Helen followed her down a hallway lined with rooms and soft beeping monitors. She walked quickly, her nerves electric. Her thoughts tumbled, a mixture of fear, confusion, and something deeply emotional she didn't want to name. When the nurse stopped outside a private consultation room, she opened the door and stepped aside. The doctor stood inside, arms crossed, expression tense. The same tension she had heard in his voice earlier. "Helen," he said softly, "there's something you need to know." Her heart thudded hard, once then twice, as he continued. "The situation is highly unusual." His words hung in the air, cold and unsettling, as if preparing her for something that would change everything she believed about the past she shared with Simon. The consultation room felt too small the moment Helen stepped inside. The air carried a faint chill, and the overhead light hummed quietly, but none of that mattered, not when the doctor's expression looked like it had been carved from worry itself. He motioned for her to sit. She lowered herself into the chair, palms pressed against her knees to stop them from trembling. Every fiber of her body felt tense, waiting for news she wasn't sure she wanted. The doctor sat across from her, fingers laced tightly together. "Helen," he began slowly, "we ran the initial compatibility test. The results came back, unexpected." Her breath caught. Unexpected how? He studied her face for a moment, as if preparing her for something he couldn't soften. "You're not just compatible with Simon," he said. "Your blood similarity is extremely high." Helen blinked at him. "That doesn't make sense," she said. "We dated. We're not related in any way. Our connection was emotional, not biological." "I understand," he replied gently. "But the data isn't subtle, it's precise. Strong overlap, rare markers, high alignment. It's not something we see between people who have no genetic history." She shook her head, exhaling sharply through parted lips. "No, there has to be a mistake." I mean, what are you suggesting? That we were, what, created in the same lab? From the same parents? Come on. I'm not suggesting anything definitive yet. He kept his voice level, but tension clung to his words. But the numbers give us a direction we can't ignore. Helen leaned back slightly, feeling her spine press into the cold chair. Her mind raced, trying to filter meaning out of something that felt impossible. Maybe the machine malfunctioned. Maybe someone mislabeled the samples. Maybe this was all some bizarre coincidence. She held on to those thoughts because the alternative pressed too hard against her sense of reality. The doctor slid a printed sheet across the table. She didn't want to look at it, but her eyes landed on it anyway. Rows of markers, percentages, highlighted sections that meant nothing to her but clearly meant everything to him. Helen, he continued quietly, matches like this usually appear in closely linked individuals. Not siblings, not cousins, something more unique. Her pulse quickened. Her hands grew clammy. She forced a laugh, thin and brittle. You're telling me I share extremely rare markers with my ex-boyfriend. Do you? Hear how wild that sounds. He didn't smile. He didn't even blink. Wild, he agreed, but medically accurate. A knot formed in her stomach, tight and twisting. She tried to focus on her breathing, but her thoughts kept colliding with each other. Simon, her Simon, lying somewhere in this building, fighting to live. Simon, with his ambition and arrogance and hidden tenderness. Simon, whose past she thought she knew. The doctor's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. We double-checked your sample. We ran the test again. Same results. Helen pressed a hand to her forehead. This is insane. I shouldn't be here talking about genetic similarities with a man I once argued with about laundry habits. He almost smiled at her attempt to ease the tension, but it faded quickly. There's more, he said. Her heart dropped. More? His jaw tightened slightly. Your levels are not just close. They align in ways we've only documented in rare donor-linked cases. She stared at him blankly. Helen, he continued, there's a possibility you and Simon share an origin that can't be explained through family ties as people usually understand them. She pushed herself up from the chair, pacing the small room. Her hands brushed through her hair, frustration building with every breath. This doesn't make any sense, she insisted. If something like that were true, someone would have told me. My parents would have told me. Simon's parents would have told him. The doctor rose slightly from his seat, resting his hands on the table. I know this is overwhelming, but before we discuss anything further, we need the updated results. A light knock hit the door. A nurse stepped in quickly, a folder held tightly in her hands. Her chest rose and fell with rushed breaths as if she had hurried across the hall. Doctor, she said, her tone urgent, the latest test just finished. You'll want to look at this right away. The doctor took the folder. Helen's eyes followed his every movement. Her pulse hammered. Her throat tightened. He opened it. His brows knitted instantly. His face drained of color. Helen felt the room shrink. What? She asked, stepping closer. What does it say? The doctor lifted his gaze slowly, carefully, like he was handling something fragile. Helen, he whispered, this level of alignment is almost unheard of. It confirms the earlier results completely. Her skin prickled. Her breath stalled. What does that mean? She demanded. It means, he said, voice low and controlled, you and Simon share markers found only in individuals connected through highly specific donor-based programs, the type that operated quietly, without full disclosure. She stumbled back a step, gripping the edge of the chair for balance. No, she murmured, that can't be real. Before the doctor could speak further, the nurse interrupted, urgency tightening her words. Doctor, there's more. You need to see the full breakdown. Now. Helen's heartbeat pounded in her ears. The doctor looked at her with a weight she wasn't ready to carry. This is only the beginning, he said softly. The nurse stepped closer, her expression filled with pressure and fear. You'll want to see this. Now. The doctor's office felt heavier the second time Helen sat across from him. The folder he held now was thicker, its edges worn from being handled too many times in too short of a span. Helen could feel the tension in her chest rising with every passing second. The nurse waited quietly near the door, holding herself still as if movement might disrupt something fragile in the air. The doctor exhaled slowly. The updated results just came in. Helen tried to brace herself, but her nerves had already twisted into knots. "I'm ready," she said, even though she wasn't. He laid the new sheet on the desk between them. The lines, graphs, and symbols meant nothing to her, but the expression on his face made her stomach drop. "These are showing rare genetic markers," he explained, tapping the highlighted sections. "Markers we usually only see in individuals who share immediate biological ties." Helen stared at him, unmoving. "Immediate?" she repeated. "As in, what? Family?" "In most cases, yes." She blinked rapidly, her voice rising with disbelief. "But we dated. We were together for almost 2 years. We shared an apartment for half that time. We argued about who should wash dishes. Are you seriously sitting here telling me we might share something that belongs on a family tree?" Her words came out sharp and fast, her panic wrapped in humor she didn't fully intend. The doctor raised both hands slightly. "I'm not saying you're siblings or anything of that nature. Nothing suggests that. But the overlap in these markers, it's something we don't normally observe between unrelated adults." Helen leaned back in her chair, letting her head fall backward for a moment. "This is unbelievable," she muttered. "My ex-boyfriend and I sharing rare genetic markers? Tell me this is a prank, please." The doctor didn't laugh. His face stayed steady, sympathetic yet serious. "We ran the tests 3 times to rule out error," he said. "Each one confirmed the same results." Helen let out a disbelieving gasp. "You ran it 3 times? Why not just tattoo chaos on my forehead while you're at it? It would match the energy of this entire day." Her voice wobbled, but the joke softened the tension in the room for a moment. The doctor allowed a brief, reluctant smile before returning to the report. "These markers," he continued, "are typically found in individuals who share a highly particular biological source, something beyond common ancestry." Helen pressed her palms against her thighs, grounding herself as a swirl of emotions rose. Fear, frustration, confusion, disbelief. She felt like she was standing on unstable ground, unsure which direction held truth and which held a cliff. "I don't accept this," she said firmly. "There's no way. My parents would have told me something like that. Simon's parents would have told him. People don't just forget a detail this big." The doctor nodded slowly, understanding her resistance. "Most people would say the same. But what we're seeing here can't be dismissed." "No," she pushed back. "I reject it outright. The idea alone is too strange, too impossible." He folded his hands, his voice steady but cautious. "Helen, I'm not asking you to accept anything yet. I'm only presenting what the tests show. And the results are clear. You and Simon share rare markers that appear only in individuals linked through very specific biological conditions." She went silent, not because she believed him, not because she surrendered to the idea, but because she couldn't find a single thread of logic to hold on to anymore. She took a breath that felt too shallow. "Maybe the machines are wrong. They're functioning properly," he replied gently. "Maybe someone mixed up samples. We verified your identity each time. Maybe Simon has a secret twin who donates blood recreationally." That earned a soft exhale from the doctor, more sympathy than humor. "Helen, your reaction is understandable, but the data stands." Heat rose in her cheeks, frustration and fear colliding together. Her entire body felt restless, unable to settle into the chair or into the truth she was being handed. Finally, she forced herself to sit straighter. "Okay," she said quietly. "So what's the explanation? What possible reason could there be for this?" The doctor looked down at the file. Then, slowly, he closed it. "There is an explanation," he admitted. "But before I share it, you need to understand this is just the first layer. The situation is complex, and the deeper we go, the more difficult the truth may become." Helen stared at him, her heartbeat thudding hard. "Tell me anyway." He met her gaze with calm seriousness. "These markers appear in individuals whose origins involve extremely controlled donor-based procedures. It's rare, very rare, and when it appears, it means the connection isn't coincidence." She shook her head again, but this time her voice was softer, more afraid than angry. No, you're wrong. Simon and I do not share that kind of background. We don't, we can't. We're not drawing conclusions yet," he assured her. "But this is where the results point." Helen's pulse quickened. Her breath hitched. She felt the walls inching closer. First, the phone call. Then, the emergency. Now, this? Her voice cracked. Doctor, please. Tell me this is something that can be explained without rewriting my entire life. He didn't answer. And his silence was the loudest confirmation she didn't want. Helen sat frozen in her chair, staring at the doctor as if her mind needed time to catch up with what he had just said. Her pulse hammered beneath her skin, each beat echoing with disbelief. She felt as though she had stepped out of her own life and into a story that couldn't possibly belong to her. She leaned forward slightly, gripping the edge of the desk. Doctor, she said quietly, you're hinting at something big. Just say it. I need to hear the full explanation. The doctor inhaled slowly, steadying himself before continuing. What we're seeing, he began, is something we have documented only in individuals connected through certain fertility practices, specifically programs from decades ago that operated with limited transparency. Helen frowned, the words sinking in too slowly to form clarity. What does that mean? Programs like what? He hesitated for just a moment, as though choosing his words carefully. There were fertility clinics in New York in the past that used single anonymous donors for multiple families. These situations created children with rare genetic similarities that weren't disclosed to parents. Helen blinked, her thoughts scrambling. You're telling me, what exactly? That Simon and I came from the same clinic? It's possible, he replied softly. Her breath caught. The hospital room seemed to tilt. That can't be right. No one ever told me anything like that. My mother never mentioned anything about a clinic. Why would she hide that from me? There could be many reasons, he said gently. Some families weren't given full information when they sought help. Others were assured things were done differently than they truly were. Records weren't always thorough. Helen shook her head. Her voice wavered despite her effort to stay composed. No, my childhood wasn't perfect, but this is too extreme. I would have known. Someone would have said something. I can't believe my parents would keep something like that from me. The doctor folded his hands. Helen, I'm not claiming certainty. I'm telling you what the markers suggest. They point to a shared donor origin, not a shared upbringing or traditional family ties. Helen pressed her fingertips into her temples, trying to quiet the storm in her mind. A shared donor origin. Not siblings, not cousins, not anything that fit into a simple category. Just something strange, something unexpected, something that rewrote parts of her identity she hadn't even questioned. She lowered her hands, staring at the table, her voice barely above a whisper. So what you're saying is, my entire origin might not be what I thought it was? The doctor didn't answer immediately. His silence was kind, gentle, but heavy all the same. Helen, he said finally, you're not alone in this. Many individuals born through these programs never learned the truth until adulthood. Sometimes the parents were told one thing, and the clinic did another. Sometimes the parents chose privacy to avoid difficult conversations later. Helen laughed softly, hollow, shaky. So my parents might have gone to a clinic, and I just never knew? They never told me? They never told anyone? How do you hide something like that from your own child? Fear crept into her chest, mixing with confusion and anger, until she couldn't tell where one emotion ended, and the next began. She pushed up from her chair and began pacing the small room. The floor felt too solid beneath her feet, as if grounding her in a truth she didn't want. She rubbed her arms, trying to calm the ache rising beneath her skin. It doesn't make sense, she murmured. Why would they keep something this important from me? Why hide something that shapes who I am? What else did they hide? The doctor watched her with patience. This can be overwhelming, I know, he said softly. But we can reach out to your parents for clarification. No, she cut in quickly, shaking her head. Not yet. I can't call them right now. I can't have that conversation when I don't even understand what's happening myself. The doctor nodded. That's perfectly reasonable. You can take your time. She continued pacing, her steps quick and uneven. Her mind darted back through her childhood. Holidays, family dinners, awkward school visits with her mother trying too hard to appear cheerful. She sifted through her memories, looking for anything that might align with what the doctor was suggesting. But nothing came. No clues. No half-truths. Nothing that hinted at the possibility that she came from a clinic her parents never mentioned. She sank back into the chair, burying her face in her hands for a moment. This is unbelievable. she whispered. I already had one life crisis today when you told me my blood saved my ex. Now you're suggesting we might be connected before we even knew each other. It doesn't mean you share parents, the doctor clarified again. It means the source used to create your beginnings may have originated from the same donor. Helen let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. So you're telling me Simon and I are, what? Donor-linked strangers who dated for 2 years without knowing it? He hesitated, then nodded. In rare cases, yes. Helen stared at him. Then, despite everything, despite the fear, the confusion, the emotional chaos, her lips twitched. This is the most complicated relationship update in history. The doctor huffed a quiet breath. I can't argue with that. Her expression softened, not because she felt better, but because humor was her last shield against complete emotional collapse. She looked at him again, more composed now, though her voice still trembled. So what do we do next? Right now, he said, our priority is Simon. His condition is unstable, and these results explain why you're the closest match available. She went still. The room quieted. Her heartbeat slowed, heavy and pained. Everything, every revelation, every confusing detail, shrank behind one truth. Simon might not survive without her. Helen closed her eyes briefly, grounding herself before she faced him again. Okay, she whispered. Tell me what happens now. And with that question, she stepped into a truth far larger than she had ever expected to confront in her lifetime. The doctor had barely finished speaking when the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. Helen turned instinctively. A nurse appeared in the doorway, her expression tight, her breath shallow, her urgency unmistakable. Doctor, she said quickly, his vitals are dropping again. We need you now. Helen felt her stomach clench. She didn't need to ask who he was. Every cell in her body already knew. The doctor stood immediately, gathering the folder without closing it. Helen, stay here for a moment, he instructed, though the strain in his voice made it clear he doubted she would. But Helen was already out of her chair, following close behind them as they rushed down the hall. The atmosphere changed instantly. The soft beeping of monitors grew louder. Nurses moved with purpose, their voices low but sharp. The urgency was no longer theoretical. It was real, immediate, pulsing through the air like a warning. Helen's heart pounded as she reached the doorway of a treatment room. She couldn't see Simon clearly from where she stood, but she could hear the alarms, rapid, piercing, threatening. A nurse tried to move her aside gently, but Helen shook her head. I'm not leaving, she said, her voice tight. Inside the room, the medical team surrounded Simon. His skin looked pale, drained of the warmth she remembered. Tubes connected him to machines that blinked aggressively, showing numbers that seemed too low, too unstable, too fragile. Helen's breath hitched. She pressed a hand over her mouth as fear surged through her chest. The doctor leaned over the bed, checking the monitors. He's losing blood faster than we can stabilize, he said. We can only keep this up for a short time. Helen took a step forward, unable to stay still. What do you need? What can I do? The doctor turned to her, and the weight of his expression stole the breath from her lungs. Helen, he said, steady but firm, if you're willing, we need to begin prep for your donation immediately. He doesn't have long. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She had known, from the moment she answered that phone call, that this moment might come. She had known she would be forced to confront the emotional remnants of her past, but she hadn't expected fear to wrap around her so quickly. Fear not for herself, but for him. Simon, the man who once occupied so much of her life. The man who frustrated her, challenged her, and in his own way, cared deeply, even when he didn't know how to show it. The man she had convinced herself she had moved on from. Seeing him like this stripped away every wall she had built since their breakup. No anger remained, no resentment, only the raw truth that life didn't wait for people to sort out their emotions. Helen? The doctor repeated. She swallowed hard. Her voice trembled, but her resolve didn't. Yes, she said. Do whatever you need. I'll do it. The doctor nodded, relief flickering through his eyes, before he signaled the nurses. One of them approached her gently. We'll take you to pre-op now. We need to start right away. Helen followed, her legs unsteady but determined. They led her into a preparation area. Bright overhead lights, crisp white sheets and equipment lined neatly along the wall. A nurse handed her a gown. "You can change behind that curtain," she said softly. "We'll begin as soon as you're ready." Helen's hands trembled as she changed into the gown. Her mind raced through memories of Simon, not the complicated, confusing parts, but the simple ones. The quiet laugh he tried to hide when she teased him. The way he once kissed her forehead when she didn't feel well. The rare moments he allowed himself to be vulnerable. She had tried so hard to forget those moments, but right now, they rose to the surface, reminding her of exactly why she couldn't walk away. When she stepped out from behind the curtain, the nurse guided her to the bed where she would lie during the procedure. Helen climbed onto it slowly, the paper beneath her crinkling as she settled in. Another nurse checked her arm for suitable veins, while the doctor approached once more. "We'll take care of you," he assured her. "And we'll move quickly. His condition is still declining." Helen nodded, her throat tight. She looked up at the ceiling, inhaling deeply as she tried to calm the trembling in her chest. "Just tell me one thing," she whispered. The doctor paused. "What is it?" "He's going to make it, right?" The doctor didn't give false hope. He didn't sugarcoat. But he placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her with sincerity. "He has a chance because of you," he said. "We're going to do everything possible." That was enough. Helen closed her eyes as the team prepared. Machines beeped softly. Nurses moved around her with practiced efficiency. A voice spoke near her ear, gentle but steady. "We're starting in just a moment." Helen exhaled slowly, letting her fear settle behind her determination. "If you're still watching," she whispered under her breath, imagining the listeners of her story, "make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next." Her voice shook, but her commitment didn't. She was doing this for Simon, for the truth, for answers she never wanted but could no longer escape. And as they began the procedure, Helen held on to one truth. This wasn't just about saving a life. It was the first step toward uncovering everything hidden beneath the surface of who she and Simon truly were. The world returned to Simon in fragments, soft beeps, faint echoes, a distant hum that felt like it was coming from underwater. His eyelids twitched, struggling to lift, but they felt impossibly heavy. For a moment, he wasn't sure if he was dreaming or drifting somewhere between consciousness and darkness. Then a quiet voice pierced the haze. "Simon." His heartbeat stumbled. It was her, Helen. The sound of her voice cut through every layer of fog in his mind. If he had been drifting, that single word, spoken with worry, softness, and something he couldn't name, pulled him back with surprising force. With effort, his eyes fluttered open. The room's brightness made them blink several times before his vision finally settled, and there she was, sitting beside his bed, leaning forward slightly, hands clasped tightly in her lap, as if she had been holding onto her own breath for hours. Her face was tired, exhausted even, but her eyes, those familiar eyes he once memorized, held something warm and shaken. "Helen," he whispered, though the word barely sounded like him. His voice was rough, weak, and fragile. Helen let out a breath she had been holding far too long. "You're awake," she murmured, her expression full of relief she tried to hide. Simon attempted to shift, but pain rippled through him. Helen reached out, instinctively, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Don't move," she said softly. "You're still recovering." He relaxed beneath her touch, something he hadn't done in years. It felt strange and familiar all at once. As he looked at her, memory flickered. The last thing he remembered clearly was a blur of pain, collapsing, voices shouting. Then nothing. "Why are you here?" he asked weakly. Not accusatory, just confused. Helen blinked, a faint, shaky smile touching her lips. "You needed blood," she said. "And I'm apparently the best match." Simon's brows knitted faintly. "You donated?" "Of course I did," she said, as if the answer should have been obvious. Something tight in his chest loosened. She could have walked away. She could have ignored the call. She could have decided the past was too heavy to step back into. But she came. For him, a sudden, unexpected emotion washed over him. Gratitude so strong it almost hurt. "Thank you," he whispered, voice cracking slightly. Helen looked away for a moment, gathering her composure. "It's fine," she murmured. "You're alive. That's what matters." He watched her quietly. There was something in her posture, a subtle tension that told him there was more happening beneath the surface, something she wasn't saying yet. "How long was I out?" he asked. "A few hours," she replied. "Your condition kept shifting. The doctors didn't know if you'd stabilize." He absorbed her words slowly. She had stayed the entire time. His throat tightened. "Helen," he said softly, "I didn't expect any of this." "I didn't either," she admitted. "Trust me." Her voice wavered for a moment, but she steadied it. Helen was always strong, stronger than he ever gave her credit for when they were together. Simon blinked, trying to sit up again, and she gently pressed him back into the pillow. "You're exhausted," she said. "Just rest." He studied her face, noting the worry she tried to hide. "You look tired, too." She let out a small, humorless laugh. "That's because I am." A brief silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just full of everything unsaid. "Were you afraid?" he asked suddenly, surprising even himself. Helen's eyes softened, and she looked away. "I was," she whispered. "More than I expected." That answer settled deep inside him. His mind searched for the right words, but found none. Their breakup had been complicated. Too much miscommunication, too many moments he should have handled better, too much distance he didn't know how to bridge. Now seeing her here, after saving his life, those old regrets rose like shadows he couldn't hide from. He swallowed, his voice quiet. "You didn't have to come." Helen looked at him again, her expression conflicted. "I know," she said, "but I couldn't let you die, Simon. No matter what happened between us." Her honesty hit him with unexpected force. He wanted to reach for her hand. He wanted to say something, anything, but his strength was fading, replaced by the exhaustion settling into every muscle. Still, one question burned in his chest. "What did the doctor say?" he asked. Helen hesitated, just long enough for him to feel a flicker of unease. "He'll explain everything when he comes back," she said gently. "You need to gather your strength first." Simon exhaled slowly. Whatever she wasn't telling him, it was big. He could sense it in her eyes, her restraint, the careful way she spoke. But for now he was too weak to press. Helen reached out again, brushing a stray piece of hair away from his forehead. The touch was soft, tender, a gesture that carried echoes of the life they once shared. His eyes began to drift closed again. He didn't want to sleep. He didn't want to lose the moment. "Helen," he whispered. "Yes? I'm glad. You're here." Her breath caught, just barely. "I'm here," she whispered back. "I'm not going anywhere." And as his eyes finally closed, he felt safer than he had in years, held by the one person who refused to give up on him, even after everything fell apart. When Simon woke again, the room felt quieter than before. The brightness of the overhead light seemed softer, and the steady rhythm from the monitor beside him no longer sounded chaotic. He blinked a few times, adjusting to the light, and when his vision cleared, he saw Helen still seated beside him. Her posture had shifted. She sat straighter, more alert, but the weariness hadn't left her eyes. She must have stayed the entire time. The realization tugged something inside him he didn't have the strength to name. Helen noticed him stirring. "You're awake again," she said, relief warming her voice. Simon swallowed, his throat dry. "I feel different." "Better?" she asked. "A little." Before Helen could say more, the door opened quietly. The doctor stepped inside, carrying the same folder he had shown Helen earlier, the one she had struggled to make sense of, the one that held truths heavy enough to unsettle even her. He approached the bed with a calm, measured expression. "Simon, it's good to see you awake. How are you feeling?" Simon gave a faint, exhausted nod. "Tired, but alive, I guess." "You are," the doctor confirmed softly. "Thanks to Helen." Simon glanced at her, slow, lingering, grateful. She looked away, the emotion too heavy to meet head-on. The doctor pulled a chair closer to the bed. "I need to discuss something important with both of you. Helen has already heard part of it, but not all." Helen stiffened slightly, as if bracing herself for the moment she knew had been coming. Simon frowned. "What is it?" The doctor hesitated, as though giving him one last moment without the weight he was about to carry. Then he opened the folder. "Simon," he began carefully, "your blood tests revealed something unusual. Extremely unusual." Simon listened, confused but attentive. Unusual how? We discovered that Helen wasn't just a compatible donor. Her blood aligned with yours at a level we only see in individuals who share very rare genetic markers. Simon blinked slowly, processing. What does that mean? Helen watched him closely, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her pants. The doctor continued, choosing each word with precision. These markers don't appear in typical relatives, not siblings, not cousins, not people with shared ancestry in the traditional sense. Simon's confusion deepened. Then, what are you saying? The doctor exhaled. They appear in individuals who were conceived through certain fertility practices used years ago in New York. Practices involving single anonymous donors, used repeatedly across different families. Silence fell like a weight. The words hit Simon with the force of something he never imagined he would hear. He stared at the doctor, unsure whether he understood correctly. You're telling me my parents used a donor? It is highly likely, the doctor answered gently. Your markers match patterns recorded in cases where families sought help conceiving through those programs. Simon shook his head slowly. No, my parents never told me anything like that. They would have said something. Not necessarily, the doctor replied. Many families involved were assured confidentiality. Others were told procedures were entirely different from what the clinics actually did. The color drained from Simon's face. He looked lost, like the foundation beneath him had quietly dissolved. And Helen? He asked, his voice suddenly unsteady. What does she have to do with any of this? Helen swallowed hard, her eyes lowering. The doctor answered for her. She shares the same type of markers, which means the two of you were almost certainly conceived from the same donor source. The words hung between them, sharp and heavy. Helen closed her eyes briefly, unable to read Simon's reaction. Simon stared at her, shock widening his eyes. So, He couldn't finish the sentence. No, the doctor said firmly. Not siblings, not cousins. Your genetic relationship doesn't fall into direct family categories. What you share is a donor origin, not familial bonds in the traditional sense, but it does explain why Helen's blood was uniquely compatible. Simon's chest tightened. He gripped the edges of the blanket as though anchoring himself. His voice turned hoarse. My whole life, they never said anything. Not one word. Helen reached out instinctively, her hand brushing his arm. He didn't pull away. The doctor softened his tone. This is a difficult truth for anyone to hear, and it's completely valid to feel overwhelmed. Overwhelmed didn't begin to describe it. Simon looked at Helen again. His voice trembled. You knew before I woke up? Helen nodded slowly. Only a part of it. The rest, the deeper explanation, I just learned with you. The room felt cold. Not from temperature, but from the way Simon seemed to retreat inside himself, trying to hold on to something familiar while everything around him warped. He swallowed, forcing himself to speak. So my parents, they lied to me? Possibly, the doctor replied. Or they may have been given incomplete information by the clinic. Both were common patterns years ago. Simon pressed a hand against his eyes, breathing shakily. I can't believe this. Helen leaned forward, her voice gentle. Simon, this doesn't change who you are. Not the parts that matter. He let his hand fall away from his face and looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing someone who had walked through fire just to sit beside him. His voice cracked. I don't even know what's real anymore. Helen reached for his hand. This time, she didn't hesitate. Her fingers wrapped around his, warm and steady. You're real, she whispered. Your life is real. The person you've become is real. This is just one truth you didn't know before today. Simon's eyes glistened, not from weakness, but from a raw emotional wound being pulled open. He didn't pull away from her touch. He held onto it like it was the only solid ground he had left. The doctor closed the folder quietly. I'll give you both time. When the door shut behind him, the silence between Helen and Simon filled with something heavy and intimate. Simon's voice broke first. Helen, I can't process this alone. You don't have to, she whispered. And in that moment, the past didn't matter. The breakup didn't matter. Their old wounds didn't matter. All that mattered was the truth they now shared, something neither of them chose, but something only they could face together. The doctor's footsteps faded down the hallway, leaving behind a quiet that felt far heavier than the silence earlier. Simon stared at the closed door long after it shut, his expression blank, not because he felt nothing, but because he felt too much at once. His hand remained in Helen's, their fingers loosely interlocked. She didn't squeeze, didn't push. She simply stayed, offering her presence the same way she always had in the past, steady and patient. Simon finally spoke, his voice low, almost fragile. "I don't recognize my own life anymore." Helen's chest tightened. She shifted her chair closer, not touching him more, but close enough for him to feel she wasn't leaving. "What you learned today would break anyone," she said quietly. "You don't have to make sense of it right now." He laughed weakly, a sound without joy. "You know what's strange?" he murmured. "I always thought my biggest fear was failure, that I'd disappoint people, that I wasn't enough. But it turns out, the thing that scares me most is realizing everything I believed about myself might not be true." Helen's heart softened. He had never said something like that before, not when they were together, not when they fought, not even during the painful end. Simon never admitted fear. He never admitted doubt. He never let himself unravel in front of anyone. She reached out gently, brushing her thumb across the back of his hand. "That doesn't erase who you are," she whispered. "It doesn't change the man you've spent years becoming." His eyes glistened, but he blinked quickly, trying to steady himself. "You don't understand," he said, voice tight. "My parents, they built this image, this perfect, controlled version of who I was supposed to be. And now, I don't even know if they saw me as theirs." Helen's breath hitched. She hadn't expected that layer of hurt. "Simon," she said softly, leaning in, "love doesn't come from biology. It comes from what people do, how they show up. Even if the truth was hidden, it doesn't erase the years they raised you. But it's okay to be angry. It's okay to feel betrayed. Anyone would." His jaw clenched, then softened. He looked at her, really looked at her, as though seeing someone who understood him in ways no one else ever had. "You always said I didn't talk enough," he murmured. She smiled faintly. "I did say that, and you were right." His voice cracked again. "I kept everything inside. I thought being vulnerable made me weak. But now, I don't know how to hold all of this in." "You don't have to," she said. He swallowed, his breathing uneven. "I don't know who I am anymore, Helen." She felt that sentence like a weight placed gently into her hands, delicate, painful, and honest. She moved a little closer, careful, respectful of his space, but close enough for him to feel the warmth of her presence. "You're someone who survived something terrifying today," she whispered. "You're someone who built his life from nothing. You're someone who made mistakes, but also someone who tried. None of that changes because of a truth you didn't ask for." Simon looked down at their hands intertwined. For a moment, he didn't speak. When he did, his voice trembled openly, soft, wounded. "I feel lost." Helen's heart broke for him, not out of pity, but because this was the version of Simon she always knew existed beneath the sharp edges and polished exterior. A man who cared deeply but didn't know how to say it. A man who carried burdens silently. A man who wanted connection but didn't know how to hold on to it. She lifted her other hand and cupped his cheek gently, her thumb brushing the faint line of stubble along his jaw. "Then let me be with you while you find your way," she whispered. "You don't have to face this alone." Simon closed his eyes, leaning ever so slightly into her touch, not dramatically, but with the weight of someone who had finally stopped trying to stand on shaking legs. The tension in his shoulders softened. His breathing slowed. For the first time since waking, he allowed himself to be vulnerable without restraint. He opened his eyes again, and they were filled with a raw honesty she had never seen from him, not even during the most intimate moments they once shared. "Helen," he whispered, "I never stopped caring about you." Her breath caught. The room felt still, suspended in quiet warmth and trembling truth. She didn't pull away. She didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, she let her forehead rest lightly against his, soft, comforting, meaningful without crossing the line. "I never stopped caring either," she admitted. Simon exhaled shakily, his voice breaking for the first time in years. "I'm scared," he whispered. Helen's hands framed his face gently. "And I'm here," she murmured. "I'm right here." The emotion in the room deepened, not dramatic, not rushed, just honest. The kind of connection built slowly over years, fractured by pain, and now resurfacing in the moment they needed it most. Simon's fingers tightened around hers, not demanding, but holding on as if she were the one steady place in an unraveling world. And in that quiet hospital room, with machines humming softly beside them, something shifted between them. Subtle, fragile, but unmistakably real. Not a restart. Not a confession of love, but a recognition they still mattered to each other, deeply, quietly, undeniably, and this moment was the beginning of them facing the truth, together. When Helen stepped outside the hospital for the first time since Simon woke up, the cool New York air hit her like a wave of truth she wasn't ready to face. She wrapped her arms around herself, not out of cold, but because her mind felt too full, too heavy, with the weight of everything the doctor had revealed. Rare markers, shared donor origins, secrets buried long before she took her first breath. She had spent her entire life believing she knew where she came from, believing her childhood, though imperfect, was built on truth. But today cracked that open. Now she needed answers. Her phone felt warm in her hand as she debated what to do. Calling her mother wasn't something she took lightly. Their relationship had always been layered, full of care, distance, unspoken things, and moments where truth sat between them like a closed door. But avoiding the conversation now would only prolong the ache tightening her chest. She inhaled deeply and pressed the call button. The line rang once, twice. Then, "Helen?" her mother answered, sounding cheerful, unaware of the storm her daughter was standing in. "Mom, I need to talk to you." Helen's voice trembled, despite her attempt to stay composed. Concern replaced her mother's light tone instantly. "Are you all right? You sound upset." Helen swallowed. "I'm at St. Luke's Hospital." There was a pause. Long, sharp. "Hospital. What happened? Are you hurt?" "No. I'm fine," Helen said. "But something happened. Something about me, and about my past." Her mother exhaled shakily. "Tell me what's going on." Helen stepped to the side of the entrance, leaning against the brick wall. "Do you know anything about a fertility program in New York? Something from years ago? Something involving donor sources?" The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It wasn't shock. It was recognition. Helen's stomach dropped. "Mom," she whispered, "please say something." Her mother's voice finally came through, thin, trembling. "Where did you hear that?" "Hospitals run tests, Mom," Helen replied softly. "They show things. They show truths people don't always expect." Her breath hitched. "Please, just tell me." Another long pause. Then her mother exhaled, a sound full of guilt, fear, and years of unspoken truth. "Helen," she said gently, "your father and I wanted you more than anything in this world, and when we couldn't conceive naturally, we turned to a clinic. They told us everything was safe, simple, normal. They didn't tell us the full truth." Helen pressed a hand over her eyes as emotion rushed through her. "Why didn't you tell me?" "We were scared," her mother admitted. "We were told confidentiality protected you, protected us. We thought it didn't matter how you came into our lives, only that you did." Helen tried to breathe, but the city around her felt too loud, too crowded with the weight of revelations. "So it's true," she whispered. "I wasn't conceived the way I thought." "You were conceived with love," her mother said immediately. "With hope. With help we didn't fully understand." Helen exhaled shakily. "Mom, do you know anything about donor overlaps, or programs where one donor was used again and again?" Her mother's breath faltered. "I didn't know until later. I suspected something when more information came out about other families years afterward, but we didn't want to scare you. We didn't want you to feel different." Helen's chest tightened. "But I deserved the truth." "Yes," her mother's voice broke. "You did. And I'm so sorry." Helen leaned her head against the cool brick wall, letting the truth settle. Painful, surprising, clarifying. She still didn't know everything, but now she knew enough to understand she wasn't imagining the impossible connections the hospital discovered. Her mother continued softly, "Are you alone right now?" Helen hesitated. Then she shook her head, though her mother couldn't see it. "No, I'm here because someone needed help. Someone who shares these markers with me." Her mother inhaled sharply. "Helen, does that mean—" "It means exactly what it sounds like," Helen whispered. "And I don't know how to feel about it." "Oh, sweetheart," her mother murmured, tears evident in her voice. "I'm so sorry you're going through this." Helen nodded, though her throat was too tight to respond. She wasn't angry, not truly. She was overwhelmed. She was unraveling pieces of her identity, while trying to save someone who had shaped years of her life. "I'll call you later," Helen said softly. "I need time." "Take all the time you need," her mother replied. Helen ended the call gently. She turned and walked slowly down the sidewalk, letting the noise of the city wash over her. Cars honked at intersections. People hurried past with coffees and laptops. The normalcy around her contrasted painfully with the storm inside her. She crossed into Lower Manhattan, letting her feet guide her, while her mind worked through truths she never imagined she'd face. Every corner she passed carried memories of her life, her move to New York, her career, her attempt to heal after Simon. Now she questioned how much of her past was shaped by choices she understood, and how much was shaped by choices she never even knew existed. She paused at a small bench near a quiet street and sat down. For a moment she let herself simply breathe, grounding herself the way she had learned during stressful days at work. She wasn't broken. She wasn't lost. She was discovering something about her origin that had been hidden, not to harm her, but because life didn't always come with clean explanations. But she wasn't alone. Simon was facing the same truth, even more painfully. And somehow, their lives were tied together again, in a way neither of them asked for, yet neither of them could deny. As she rose from the bench, ready to return to the hospital, one thing was clear. This wasn't just about her past anymore. It was about her future, and Simon's, and the truth they would now have to face, together. Simon hadn't been awake for long, but the emotional weight from the doctor's explanation stayed pressed on his chest like something he couldn't push away. Even as his strength slowly returned, the truth consumed him in sharp waves. He lay silently for several minutes after Helen left to give him privacy, staring at the ceiling with unfocused eyes. He felt hollow, yet full of emotions he couldn't name: betrayal, disbelief, confusion, and something deeper he refused to acknowledge. Eventually he reached for his phone, his hand trembling slightly. His parents' number stared back at him. Calling them felt both necessary and unbearable. He pressed the call button anyway. The phone rang twice before his father answered. "Simon, are you all right? Your assistant told us you were in the hospital." His father's voice was steady, too steady, as if he were already prepared to dismiss anything uncomfortable. "I'm fine," Simon said, though his voice sounded nothing like normal. "I need you and Mom here, now." A pause. Then his father said, "We're on our way." When they arrived nearly an hour later, Simon's entire body felt tense. His mother rushed in first, her eyes shining with fear, relief, and worry. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, touching his cheek. "We were terrified." His father stood beside her, offering a tight nod, seemingly trying to hold the moment together with composure alone. Simon didn't return his mother's hug, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know how to touch someone he wasn't sure he trusted anymore. When she stepped back, Simon looked between them, his expression unreadable. "I need answers," he said quietly. His parents exchanged a glance, subtle but telling. Alarm flickered in his mother's eyes. Denial flickered in his father's. "What do you mean?" his father asked carefully. Simon swallowed. "The doctors ran genetic tests. They found rare markers that match another patient. A match so precise it only appears in cases involving donor-based conception." His mother stiffened. His father's jaw tightened. Simon's voice wavered, but he pushed through. "I want the truth. Did you use a donor to conceive me?" The room froze. His mother's lower lip trembled. His father looked down at the floor for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Simon to see an unspoken truth spill through the cracks of silence. His father finally exhaled and said, "We didn't want you to feel different." Simon's heart cracked open. "So it's true," he whispered. "You kept something this important from me?" His mother stepped toward him, tears forming. "Simon, we struggled for years. We wanted a child so badly. When we went to that clinic, they promised confidentiality. We were told the details didn't matter, that all that mattered was that you were ours. You were always ours," his father added quickly. Too quickly. Simon clenched the blanket in his fists. "But you didn't tell me. You let me grow up believing something that wasn't true." "We were going to tell you someday," his mother whispered. "When?" Simon snapped, not angry, but wounded. During retirement? At a holiday dinner? When exactly were you going to tell me the core of my identity was built on something you hid? His father lifted his chin. It wasn't meant to harm you. But it did, Simon said softly. His mother wiped her eyes. We were scared, Simon. Scared you'd feel unwanted. Scared you'd think we weren't enough. For a moment, Simon's expression softened, just barely. He knew they loved him. He knew they had given him every advantage, every opportunity. He had never doubted that. But truth, late truth, came with its own kind of pain. He looked at them again, his voice quieter, pained. There's more. Both parents stilled. The markers matched with someone else here, someone I know, someone significant. His mother's breath caught. Helen? Simon nodded slowly. His father looked troubled but tried to maintain composure. That doesn't mean anything. Those programs were vast. Many families. It means enough, Simon cut in. It means the clinic used the same donor for multiple families. And you never told me anything that might have prepared me for this moment. His father hardened his voice. Simon, you're overreacting. This doesn't change who you are. Simon laughed weakly, a thin sound without humor. It changes everything. His mother stepped forward cautiously. Simon, sweetheart, please let us explain. Then explain, he said. Explain why you waited my entire life to say this. Explain why I had to learn it from a doctor while lying unconscious. She opened her mouth, but no words came out, only guilt. Simon slumped against the pillows, his strength fading under the emotional weight pressing down on him. Helen returned quietly then, pausing at the doorway. She hadn't intended to interrupt, but the tension in the room was unmistakable. Simon looked up at her, his eyes full of exhaustion and vulnerability. Her presence steadied him. His mother noticed and wiped her cheeks quickly. We should give you some space. Simon didn't argue, didn't stop them, didn't ask them to stay. His father gave a short nod and guided his wife out of the room. When the door closed behind them, the silence felt heavy again, but different now. Helen walked toward him slowly. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't demand details. She simply sat beside him, offering the steadiness he desperately needed. Simon leaned his head back, eyes closed. They knew, he whispered. They knew, and they didn't tell me. Helen's heart softened. She reached for his hand gently. I'm here, she said. His fingers closed around hers, tight, desperate, but grateful. Thank you, he whispered. For staying. I'm not going anywhere, she replied softly. And she meant it. For the first time that day, Simon felt the slightest breath of relief, as if he didn't have to carry the truth alone anymore. The doctor returned a short while after Simon's parents left, his expression more tense than before. He carried a thin stack of documents, clipped together with a red tab that made Helen's attention sharpen instantly. Simon straightened slowly in the bed. He still looked exhausted, pale from blood loss and emotional turmoil, but he forced himself upright, leaning slightly toward the doctor. Is something wrong? Helen asked quietly. The doctor hesitated, a hesitation that only ever came before difficult truths. There's been a development, he said, one that affects both of you. Simon felt the faint tightening in his chest turn into something heavier. Another test result? In a way, the doctor replied. We reviewed your past medical records, not just recent ones, records from your early childhood, and we found something unusual. Helen and Simon exchanged a glance, tired, nervous, bracing. The doctor set the documents on the bedside table. These files show inconsistencies, details that don't align with your official medical history. Simon frowned. Inconsistencies like what? The doctor opened the top sheet and rotated it toward them. This record indicates that, according to the first clinic that treated you as an infant, your genetic markers did not match those you have now. Helen's breath caught. She leaned forward slightly. What do you mean? She asked softly. It means someone altered your file, the doctor said. Your original records show no trace of the rare markers you currently possess. Those markers, the ones that align with Helen, were not documented in your earliest medical entries. Simon stared, his brow tightening. That doesn't make sense. Genetic markers can't just appear. Exactly, the doctor agreed, which is why this is so alarming. Helen felt a chill crawl across her skin. So, someone changed his records later? Yes, the doctor said. Someone tampered with them. Someone intentionally entered new information that contradicts the earliest reports. Simon looked stunned, as if someone had hit a switch inside him that shut down his ability to respond immediately. My file was changed? He whispered. By who? We don't know yet, the doctor said. But based on the timestamps attached to the altered documents, the changes were made years after your birth. Not during. Not by the clinic itself, by a later provider. Helen's throat tightened. So whoever changed it knew what they were doing. Yes, the doctor confirmed. They purposely added those markers into your chart, markers that linked you to a donor source. Simon's pulse thudded in his ears. But why? What would anyone gain by doing that? The doctor paused before responding. There are two possibilities. Either someone wanted to hide your true origins behind partial truths, or someone wanted to force your chart to match another individual's genetic profile. Helen went still. You mean match it to mine, she said quietly. The doctor didn't answer directly, but the silence was more honest than words. Simon inhaled shakily, the weight of disbelief crushing his composure. So for years, I've been living with medical files that don't even reflect who I am. Yes, the doctor said, and that means the real truth is buried beneath manipulation, whether this was done to protect you, mislead you, or hide wrongdoing. We don't yet know. Helen's eyes softened, and she reached for Simon's hand again, grounding him. Simon didn't pull away. He couldn't. He needed the connection, needed something steady to hold on to while the world tilted under him again. The doctor continued gently. We'll investigate further. But for now, you both need to understand that Simon's markers should not match Helen's, not according to his earliest medical files. And yet they do, Helen whispered. Yes, he said. Which means the deeper truth lies somewhere in your shared past, far deeper than a clinic's involvement alone. Simon felt something inside him crumble further, not painfully, but numbly, like a door unlocking to a hallway of questions he had no idea existed. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. This just keeps getting worse. Helen moved her chair closer. You're not alone, she murmured. We're in this together. He looked at her, his eyes clouded with shock, and something softer, something grateful. The doctor carefully closed the folder. I'm going to give you time to process this. But know this, what we discovered today indicates someone intentionally rewrote parts of Simon's medical history. And whatever the reason was, it's tied to both of you. Helen's heartbeat accelerated. Simon stiffened. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't random. This wasn't just a donor program gone wrong. This was deliberate. When the doctor left the room, the silence felt charged. Not empty, but full of questions too large to hold. Simon closed his eyes briefly. Someone changed my records, Helen. Someone didn't want me to know the truth. Helen's voice softened. But we know enough now to start finding out who and why. Simon opened his eyes again and looked at her. This time there was a spark beneath the exhaustion, a mix of determination and fragile clarity. I don't want to do this alone, he admitted. You won't, she said. I'm here. Simon let her hand rest in his grip steadying. Then Helen exhaled gently, looking toward the hallway, then back at him. We're getting close to something real, something dangerous for whoever hid it. Simon nodded slowly. And just before the chapter closed on this moment, Helen lifted her voice in a steady, quiet CTA, as if speaking to the viewer directly. If you're still watching, make sure you're subscribed, because the truth is only beginning to surface. The room settled into silence once more, heavy, electric, certain. This wasn't just about the past anymore. This was a mystery someone had tried to bury. And now, Helen and Simon were standing at the edge of uncovering everything. The morning light filtered through the partially drawn curtains in Simon's hospital room, casting gentle warmth across the blanket covering his legs. He looked stronger than he had the day before, still pale, still exhausted, but awake with a determination that hadn't been present since the truth first shattered his world. Helen sat beside him, a tablet in her hand. The doctor had given them permission to access the digital archive of Simon's medical files to help them understand what had been altered. What he hadn't expected was how quickly Helen would learn to navigate the database with sharp focus and unwavering drive. Simon watched her scroll through rows of dates and coded entries, her brow furrowed in concentration. You don't have to do all of this, he said quietly. Helen didn't look up. Yes, I do. Why? She paused, just long enough for the emotion behind her answer to gather. Because you shouldn't have to face this alone, she said softly. And because if someone tampered with your life before you even knew how to speak, that person should be exposed. Simon swallowed, emotion thick in his throat. He wasn't used to being protected. He wasn't used to anyone standing beside him, without asking what they would gain from doing so. But Helen's loyalty wasn't attached to conditions. It came from genuine care, the kind he had once taken for granted, the kind he wasn't sure he deserved. She tapped another file open. Here's the earliest scanned entry. Simon leaned forward slowly, careful not to strain the healing incision beneath his hospital gown. Adjusting himself brought a faint wince, and Helen immediately noticed. Don't overdo it, she said gently. You still need time to recover. He nodded, but his focus didn't break from the screen. The document loaded, an early childhood medical report. Helen zoomed in. Look at this note here. A line in small print read, "Initial genetic screening consistent with baseline markers. No anomalies detected." Simon frowned. Baseline markers? That contradicts everything the doctor told us yesterday. Exactly, Helen replied. According to this, you didn't have any of the rare markers at birth. None. She opened a second file. This one dated several years later. This one did mention rare markers. Simon stared at the discrepancy, disbelief tightening his jaw. Why would two reports conflict like this? They wouldn't, Helen replied. Not unless someone wanted them to. She kept scrolling, more determined now. The next entries grew increasingly suspicious, mismatched signatures, edits made years apart by different providers, and metadata showing access logs at unusual times. She tapped one specific entry, the most heavily modified file. This one right here, she said. Look at the timestamp on the alterations. Simon squinted at the details. That's years after I started school. And look at the digital author tag, Helen added, her voice tightening. It's not from the clinic, it's from a private office. Simon's stomach dropped. A private office. Not the fertility program, not the hospital. Someone outside the original system had gone in and changed the record. His throat tightened. They hid it. On purpose. Helen nodded slowly. And they didn't just hide it. They replaced the original markers with a different set. Markers that match mine. Simon's breath hitched. You're saying someone wanted my file to resemble yours? Exactly, she confirmed. They wanted your genetic profile to look like it came from the same source as mine, even if the science behind it didn't support that. He sank back into the pillows, the weight of realization settling heavily in his chest. So I wasn't just conceived through a donor program, he said quietly. Someone manipulated my file to make sure no one could trace the truth. Helen's expression softened as she placed the tablet gently on the tray table beside him. Simon, she said, this wasn't an accident. The clinic wasn't just careless. Someone, an individual, deliberately covered your origins. He exhaled shakily. But why? What could possibly be the motive? Helen thought for a long moment. It could have been the program trying to cover their tracks when investigations began decades ago. Or it could have been someone in your childhood medical circle trying to erase signs of misconduct. What misconduct? Simon asked, though fear already prickled beneath his words. Helen met his gaze. Programs like this weren't always honest. Some used donors far more than they disclosed. Some families were misled. Some records were falsified to avoid lawsuits, exposure, or ethical reviews. Simon closed his eyes as the full weight of the truth hit him. He wasn't just a donor child. He was part of a cover-up, a deliberate, structured effort to bury the origins of multiple children, including him. A silence stretched between them, quiet, heavy, impossible to ignore. Helen reached out, laying her hand gently over his. Not for him to lean on her, just to remind him he didn't have to shoulder the truth alone. We can trace the edits, she said softly. There are digital fingerprints. If we dig deep enough, we'll find exactly who altered your file. Simon opened his eyes again, meeting hers. You'll help me? There was no hesitation. Yes, she said. Until we reach the truth. He let out a breath, unsteady, emotional, filled with something close to relief. For the first time since everything began, he felt clarity forming through the chaos. Helen wasn't just helping him uncover his past. She was helping him reclaim it. Together, they weren't just unraveling a mystery. They were confronting a deception built long before either of them knew the truth mattered. And Simon could feel it in his bones. This wasn't just the next step. It was the beginning of a reckoning. Simon stared at the ceiling, blinking slowly as the truth continued to wash over him in relentless waves. Every new realization dug deeper, stripping away layers he had built over a lifetime, layers of certainty, identity, and confidence he once believed were unshakable. Helen stayed by his side, sensing the quiet storm rising inside him. She didn't speak. She didn't push. She simply remained close enough that he could feel her presence, her warmth, her steadiness. It took several long moments before Simon finally spoke. "I feel like my life isn't mine anymore," he whispered. Helen turned toward him. "Simon." He swallowed, voice trembling with the effort of holding himself together. "Everything I thought defined me, where I came from, who raised me, the story I believed about myself. It's all shifting. It feels like I'm standing in a room full of broken glass, and every step hurts." Helen exhaled softly, her chest tightening with empathy. "You're allowed to feel that," she whispered. "You're allowed to feel everything. Nothing about today is easy." Simon shook his head weakly. "It's not just today, it's everything. My parents lied, the clinic lied, someone tampered with my file. They built a version of me that was never real." Helen leaned forward, resting her forearms gently on the edge of his bed. "But the person you are isn't made from that file. You built your life. You shaped your values. You created everything you have, not your origins." He closed his eyes, and a tear slipped down the side of his face before he could force himself to blink it away. "I spent my entire life trying to be enough," he whispered. "Enough for my father, enough for the company, enough for everyone who expected something from me." His voice wavered as he continued. "But now I'm realizing I don't even know who I was trying to be. I was chasing an identity that might not have even belonged to me." Helen's heart ached. This was the Simon she always knew existed beneath the polished exterior. The Simon who carried silent burdens, who struggled with doubt but hid it behind ambition, who didn't know how to share the deepest parts of himself. She reached out and gently took his hand again, her thumb brushing lightly across his skin. "Simon, listen to me," she said softly. "Your worth doesn't come from a file. It doesn't come from genetics. It doesn't come from the truth someone tried to hide. You're still the man who cared enough to give everything to the people around. You, even when it hurt you. You're still the man who survived impossible pressure. And you're still the man sitting in front of me right now, trying to make sense of something no one should face alone." Simon's eyes opened slowly, meeting hers with an emotion so raw it made her chest tighten. "Helen," he murmured. "I'm scared." She nodded gently, her throat tightening. "I know. I feel like I'm disappearing," he whispered. "Like I'm losing pieces of myself one at a time." "You're not disappearing," she said, scooting closer, her voice steady but full of warmth. "You're rediscovering yourself. It's painful, but it's real. And I'm right here with you through all of it." The air between them grew warm, filled with something tender, something deep, something they both felt but neither dared define yet. Simon's voice softened, a vulnerable confession slipping free. "Helen, when we broke up, I always regretted how I pushed you away. I didn't know how to open up. I didn't know how to let anyone see me. You're letting me see you now," she whispered. He nodded weakly. "Because I don't know how to hide anymore." Helen's eyes glistened. She reached up and gently brushed a stray tear from his cheek. Simon leaned into her touch, breathing slowly, letting the grounding warmth of her hand bring him back from the edge. "You don't have to be strong right now," she murmured. "Not with me." His voice cracked. "I don't know how to start over." "You don't have to," she said, her thumb still brushing gently against him. "You only have to take the next step, one at a time, and I'll help you walk through every single one." Simon felt something inside him give way, not in defeat, but in surrender. Not to fear, but to trust. He lifted his hand slightly, brushing the side of Helen's jaw with weak but steady fingers. "You have no idea how much I need you right now," he said softly. Helen leaned into his touch, her breath catching. "And I'm here," she whispered. "I'm here, Simon. I'm not going anywhere." Their eyes locked, and in that moment, the room felt smaller, quieter, wrapped in a warmth that had nothing to do with physical comfort and everything to do with emotional connection. Their faces drew closer just slightly, not rushed, not forced, but naturally, as if pulled by a gravity that had always existed between them. Helen stopped just before crossing the boundary, letting the moment settle, respecting his fragility, respecting their history, respecting the vulnerability he had finally shown her. Simon exhaled, his forehead resting gently against hers. For a few seconds, they stayed like that, breaths mingling, hearts steadying, a quiet intimacy that healed more than words could. Helen whispered, "You're not defined by secrets. You're defined by the choices you make now." His hand tightened gently around hers. "And right now," he murmured, "I'm choosing to trust you." Helen smiled softly, brushing her forehead against his, in a peaceful, tender gesture. "And I'm choosing to stay." A quiet calm settled over Simon, not the calm of someone whose problems were solved, but the calm of someone who finally knew he didn't have to face them alone. And that truth, unlike the falsehoods in his files, was something real enough to hold on to. The morning sun crept slowly into the hospital room, lighting the space with a soft glow that made everything feel calmer than the night before. Simon sat up in his bed, posture stronger, eyes more focused. He still carried hurt, deep, heavy, undeniable. But there was something different in him now. Resolve. Helen entered quietly with 2 cups of warm tea. She placed one on his tray and handed him the other with a small smile. "You look steadier today," she said softly. Simon accepted the cup, his fingers brushing hers. "I feel steadier." She smiled faintly. "Good." A quiet moment passed between them before Simon finally exhaled. A long, thoughtful breath that signaled he'd made a decision. "Helen," he said, voice low but firm, "I can't let this stay buried." She set her cup down. "What do you mean?" He looked toward the window, watching the sunlight paint streaks across the floor. "There are other people out there, other children, other families, people who may not know the truth about their origins because the program hid everything, because someone tampered with records." He paused, jaw tightening with conviction. "If I stay quiet, I'd be letting the same lie continue for someone else." Helen nodded slowly, understanding exactly where the thought was leading. "You want to expose them." "I need to," he corrected. "This wasn't just a mistake, it was a cover-up, and someone profited from it. Someone made decisions that shaped entire lives without permission." Helen studied him, admiration filling her eyes. Simon continued, his voice growing steadier with each sentence. "My whole life, people looked at me like I had it all together, like I had every answer, but this is the first time I actually know what I'm supposed to do." "And what's that?" Helen asked gently. He looked straight into her eyes. "Fight back." The conviction in his voice was quiet, but unshakable. Helen felt warmth spread through her chest, not just from pride, but from seeing Simon step into a version of himself that was honest, vulnerable, and strong, in a way he never allowed himself to be before. "Then we fight," she said softly. A tiny, grateful smile touched his lips. "You'll help me?" "Simon," she whispered, "I didn't walk away when we were strangers with complicated history. I'm certainly not walking away now." The silence between them filled with a warmth that wasn't dramatic. It was steady, earned, real. Later that afternoon, after the doctor confirmed Simon was stable enough for visitors, his mother returned to the room. Her face looked pale, eyes red from crying. She approached quietly, unsure if she should even step inside. Simon saw her hesitation. "Mom," he said softly, "come in." She moved closer, gripping her purse tightly. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. We should have told you." He held up a hand gently. "I'm not angry anymore. Hurt, yes. Confused, but I'm not angry." Her eyes filled again. "I'm going to look into everything," Simon continued. "I need to know what really happened. But I want you and Dad to know. I don't blame you for wanting a child. I don't blame you for loving me the way you did." His mother covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. "But I need transparency now," he added. "I need honesty going forward." She nodded vigorously. "You'll have it, I promise." He gave a small, fragile smile, and for the first time since he learned the truth, the relationship between them began to mend. Not perfectly, not instantly, but with honesty. When she left, Helen returned to the edge of his bed. "You handled that beautifully," she said. Simon let out a breath. I hope so. You did? He watched her quietly for a moment, studying the softness in her expression, the strength she carried so naturally. Helen, he began, we've been through more in these days than most people go through in years, and despite everything that fell apart between us in the past, you stood by me through all of this. I stood by you, she said softly, because I care. He reached for her hand, not uncertainly this time but with calm assurance. I want to try again, he whispered. Not because of the past, not because of what we used to be, but because of who we are right now and who we can be moving forward. Helen's breath caught in her throat. I'm not asking for promises, Simon said gently. Just a chance, a real one, with honesty, with communication, with no walls this time. Helen's eyes glimmered. She tightened her fingers around his. Then let's rebuild, she whispered. Not from where we left off, but from where we are. A warm, healing silence wrapped around them. For the first time in years, they weren't running from their past. They were choosing their future. Together. When Simon was finally discharged from the hospital a few days later, he walked out with Helen beside him, her hand lightly supporting his arm. The city buzzed around them, but it felt different now, less chaotic, more filled with possibility. At the hospital exit, Simon paused. Helen, he said quietly. Thank you. For saving my life. She smiled. You saved mine too, just in a different way. He leaned his forehead against hers, gently, tenderly, the gesture warm and intimate yet entirely respectful. This is our second chance, Simon murmured. And we're not wasting it, Helen replied. They stepped out onto the sidewalk, the future stretching before them, not defined by hidden origins or altered files, but by choice, truth, and newfound strength. Their story wasn't born from perfection. It was born from survival, resilience, and courage. And now, as they began walking forward, side by side, one truth became clear. They weren't victims of their beginnings. They were the authors of their future. Together,